Hello, I am Bob Mattel, the co-producer of this video series. Welcome to this video episode of the Stathis Mattel Industry Leadership and Success Series titled Virtual Meeting Best Practices. It has become an established fact that virtual meetings are here to stay, and the best advisors will continue to leverage virtual meeting technology to benefit from the inherent efficiencies. However, all virtual meetings aren't created equal. Some are better conducted than others, and these better meetings tend to have better outcomes. This discussion will focus on how to up your game when conducting virtual meetings. We will cover things like which type of meetings are better done virtually and which are more effective face-to-face. How aggressively should you force virtual technology on your clients? Can you prospect virtually? What elements of the visual and audio setup most affect the quality of your meeting? What are the best applications to use when screen sharing, and how should you use them? How should required paperwork be handled in the virtual meeting? This video is in two parts. The first about meeting prep, and the second about meeting execution. And just so we practice what we preach to virtual meetings, we are conducting today's meeting very, very remotely, as you will see in a second. We are fortunate to be joined by two unique financial advisors who qualify as subject matter experts, and Scott Stathis will be interviewing them both from the Boston area. Our first advisor is Robert Cribbs, and while Robert serves U.S. clients of Elevations Credit Union, which is based in Colorado, he does so from a small town outside of Nelson, New Zealand, where he moved 2 years ago. So I'd say that's fairly remote. Our second advisor is Ross Cantor. Ross works in the New Orleans area and has a very successful business and has been leveraging remote technologies for the past 4 years to serve many of his important clients who moved from his area but wanted to continue to work with him. Eagle Life is the company who inspired, supported, and sponsored this video series, and we want to thank them very much for doing so. Eagle specializes in providing retirement income options, and we will be hearing more from them later. And now, let's get to our discussion.
Hello, I'm Scott Stathis of Stathis Partners, and today I will host a discussion and show and tell session with two successful advisors, Robert Cribbs and Ross Cantor, who have been leaders in successfully working remotely with their clients. They will each introduce themselves momentarily and provide two very different explanations of what forced them to start working remotely, and also give you an idea of the success they've experienced in doing so. And now let's have Robert and Ross introduce themselves. Robert, would you like to go first?
For sure. Yeah, so I'm Robert Cribbs. I'm a financial advisor through QSO Financial Services at, I guess not at, but with Elevations Credit Union out of Colorado. So my working remotely started not necessarily out of necessity, but out of a lifestyle choice. So about 2.5 years ago, my family and I picked up and moved to the other side of the world, and now we live in a small town called Pt1, New Zealand.
That's working remotely to an extreme.
Yeah,
you don't do things halfway, do you?
Right. Our Elevations IT department pointed out that we are on the end of the cable. I couldn't have picked a really further destination, but after just a 2-week vacation in New Zealand, that's all it took for my whole family to decide that this is where we wanted to be. So as I got here, just started working with the same processes before, but working on the telephone and the internet and through video chats and phone calls and emails. And found that, after a bit of getting used to it, I find that I'm more efficient now working remotely than I was in the office. So it worked out quite well. Last year was a pretty flat year. Last year was kind of getting used to it. It was kind of my first full year working remotely. And then this year, of all the years to have a bigger year, I think I'm up 15-20% over last year. I didn't have the abrupt, change that I think a lot of advisors went through, and I was able to stay in contact with clients very quickly. So it's been quite successful. And thanks to COVID, the world got used to my routine, I feel like. So that was kind of nice. Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice that you got to jump on it, and it's even in your first year, your business didn't decline, which is impressive,
No,
right?
yeah, it was, prep work for a lot of it, but then also, plenty of practice and the tools out, the technology around to do business remotely. People may be still afraid of it, but it definitely works.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And we'll get into some of the things that you do that have really worked well. And I have to get this in too. So, we're here, I'm in the Boston area, and we're on the tail end of our summer. You're on the tail end of your winter, looking forward to summer, right? It's just odd for me to think of that.
Now, and here's a really odd thing that I discovered. So today is September 2nd. Yesterday was September 1st, and that was the first day of spring. So, but wait, I thought it started on the 22nd. Well, yeah, that's the solstice, that's the equinox or something like that. But New Zealand decides to simplify it, and the first day of spring is just the 1st of September. That's just a lot easier to remember.
It's very sensible of them.
Right.
We should
it's brilliant.
And what's also interesting is that it's September 2nd there, because it's September 1st here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you're a day older than we are, so no.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Robert. Ross.
So I'm Ross Cantor. I'm the Senior Financial Advisor covering the St. Tammany market for Hancock Whitney Bank. I don't have a super cool place that I got to move to utilize video conferencing and virtual technology. We've been using it on the corporate side for probably the greater half of almost 4 years now through Cisco WebEx, whether it's training or team building exercises. So we were pretty well versed when the pandemic struck. I personally have had to utilize this technology with clients out of necessity, as we've had lots of clients that have started in my market and moved to other states or other cities, and or children of my clients that are geographically dispersed across the entire country. I may have had the mother or father as a client, and then they leave the money to 4 people that are all in 4 different states, able to work through the issues of separating the estate and continuing the relationships with the client. So my client-facing use of this was born primarily from that. Being well-versed in this technology and having used it both in an internal and external capacity has allowed me to operate my business seamlessly in a time of utter chaos, which, from my client base was very reassuring, knowing that they always have access to me. And from the moment the state of Louisiana declared a mandatory, stay-at-home order quarantine, that people had physical, visual access to me as well as phone. And we immediately began conducting businesses. And what I learned very rapidly was most advisors and firms and or banks did not have the technological capacity and or foresight to deal with something like this. So we were able to go acquisition, not only from our existing clients, but from new clients, assets from brokers that were unreachable, not communicating with their clients, or the clients just simply was not comfortable with a phone call. And internally, we were able to operate the business. I work covering a series of branches with licensed banker staff and regular bank staff. And these guys were considered essential, and they were actually working. But we, as business partners, to prevent the spread of COVID, were not allowed to go operate within the branches and go from branch to branch, just out of the sheer safety of clients and employees, which makes a ton of sense. And they had, obviously their metrics in place for that sort of thing. So I was actually able to constantly get my licensed banker team together via web chats and hold trainings, and just kind of do status updates. So as an early adopter, I guess maybe I'm an early adopter of the technology. Really allowed my business to not skip a beat, in which otherwise, for a lot of people, in my opinion, is probably a catastrophic operating environment.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on something that I want to ask you about too. So let's dive into this discussion and show and tell. We'll start with the discussion. So let's start with some kind of big picture questions that I have that relate to the situations that you're both in as you work remotely. And the first is, I'm assuming, and this is a 2-part question. So I'm assuming that as you gained experience in working remotely, you've realized that there are some types of meetings that are actually better and more efficient being conducted remotely, and other types of meetings that when possible, are better conducted face to face. So I'd like to ask both of you, and Ross, maybe you can kick us off, but both of you, your opinions on what types of meetings are best to conduct remotely and which ideally are still better conducted in person. And then the other piece of that is that there's a big difference between working out of a branch and working remotely, especially as it relates to getting referrals and, working the branch, as they say, et cetera. So give us your thoughts at, part two of that question, your thoughts on that dynamic and how do you make up for that when you're not in the branch? So Ross, if you want to start us.
Yeah. So being that we've kind of come out of the quarantine mode, it was kind of remarkable to see how many clients, even with the threat of the pandemic still, out there, still wanted face-to-face meetings. I mean, I still think to a certain degree at our core, our business is, intimate and personal in that respect, that people, when dealing with finances, still want to see you and if possible be present. Really what I found to be extremely useful was dealing with account reviews, any kind of status updates to financial planning, things that didn't necessarily require completely onboarding a new client were best done completely virtually, and particularly with existing clients. None of my clients really gave me any pushback because they knew me, they were comfortable with, who I am and how I operate. So they were basically just kind of seeing me in a different format, but to them it was still kind of the same experience. I think from a prospecting and new client acquisition role, some of that stuff, in my opinion, is still done better with a traditional phone call because the virtual environment can be a bit overwhelming and you're trying to go through so much stuff at once. And sometimes really you just need to keep it basic and just have a very simple conversation. But particularly with existing clients, the way I leveraged this during the pandemic was using the financial plan in the middle of a market downdraft to work through the software and show clients that, look, even if we update the numbers with, poor market performance, like we're still going to be okay, or justifying, hey, we need to maybe go bring some more assets in, rebalance your portfolio or make a tactical adjustment, whatever the case is. As far as the referrals in the bank environment, I mean, I'm, as you can see, kind of an office guy. And after about a month of quarantine, my wife was ready for me to be an office guy again. Our bankers, it was kind of a dynamic situation in a lot of respects because our bankers, the branches themselves were closed to traffic. So clients couldn't come in. So the engagement for referrals to them was altered severely. Not to mention they were doing, significant amounts of PPP loans. So they could meet with clients in a very controlled environment by appointment only. And usually it was specific to that at first, at least. So we use the virtual technology to be in two places at once, where if we did have a client that was sitting with a banker that needed to talk to us about something finance, if they really wanted to see us, they could put us on the WebEx and turn the monitor around and we could actually have a conversation with them. But a lot of that stuff I think works fine relegated to just a simple phone call. But to me, doing kind of maintenance and reviews and, asking, existing clients for funds and that sort of stuff worked really well in this environment. Where I think I faced a challenge was prospecting brand new clients straight through a virtual environment.
Yeah, and that's understandable. Robert, your thoughts?
Yeah, so as I kind of started out, I had the luxury of being able to kind of tippy-toe into this thing. My process to start was that I was going to work remotely for the most part, but 3 times a year I'd jump on a plane, go back to Colorado, spend a few weeks and meet with people for their annual reviews. And then I would also throw in, hey, if you have friends or family that want to come meet with me while I'm in town, by all means, let me know. Like, we can get them on the calendar. For me, it was a bit of a shock come COVID that, borders are closed, no flights out of New Zealand. I quickly got on the phone, told my clients it just wasn't going to happen this year, but we're going to work remotely. And actually, to my surprise, they were quite happy with it, and that they didn't want to come into the branch. And now I find that that's kind of sticking, that folks are really open to not having to go into the branch. Because if we think back of it, it really was a stressful time for them to anyways. Anytime you're looking over your finances in a review and in that situation, it's not comfortable. It's about as comfortable as going to the dentist. So So just transferring is like, hey, we're just going to have a simple chat on the phone, talk about a few things. And then if we need to go in depth, I've got some tools here where I can, share my screens with you or pop you up on a video chat or something like that. So like Ross mentioned, I think that there's basically 3 technology tools that we all have that are really easy. Jumping straight into the video conference, whether it's WebEx or Zoom, I think would be a mistake. Starting out with an email, follow up with a phone call, and then if you need to show something, switching over to using a video chat to do a share a screen, show a document. And so now I'm in a spot where I'm kind of wondering, do I even really come back 3 times a year to Colorado? Because it seems like people are very used to it now. In terms of new business, to follow up, I found that I had transitioned to my business on purpose to not really take on a lot of new clients. I didn't really need it. I was pretty happy where I was. However, I found that when you're not in meetings in person every day, you can actually increase your capacity to meet people. Sounds crazy, but phone calls, emails, and these things tend to be quite a bit shorter. I was finding that where I used to be booked 2 weeks out on my calendar, now I can meet people in like a couple days. So that opened up to where I was able to start talking to more people, and my clients kind of noticed it. And then along with my story of traveling to New Zealand, which I think resonated with some people, it started generating some attention. And now I just naturally am getting more referrals from clients or requests that come through the credit union for people who don't want to come into the branch, which there's a surprisingly large number of people who don't want to go into the branch. And I think that's increasing with kind of the next generation starting to accrue some wealth.
Yeah. So, Ross, I see you shaking your head there. So I assume you've experienced some of the similar things from 2 perspectives. One is not necessarily needing a bunch of referrals from the branch to grow your business, because your business is at a good established place and it's organically growing. And that's the primary point, right? I mean, you're in the same place.
Yeah, I mean, we still obviously rely on the bank referrals. I feel like as I talk to advisors kind of all over the place, a lot of it has to do with kind of where you are. I was very surprised by the amount of people, which is, converse what he's saying, is that, that actually wanted to come back into the branch, because to them it was kind of a normal thing that they got to go back into a building and sit down and do their finances. Although I do agree, it's a much more rigid environment. So I haven't seen that as much, although I think we would all agree that the pattern across the deck is that branch traffic is down, and particularly the next generation is going to do everything this way, as evidenced by the stock price of Zoom today, if we pull a chart of that thing.
Right.
But Robert and I kind of feel the same way. And by leveraging this technology, I've been able to grow my business from my existing clients, and particularly through referrals as well, because really the only people that could kind of see each other during the mandatory quarantines, or particularly we're talking a lot, were family members and extended family members. And so they'd all say, well, I talked to my financial advisor and the market's down 30-something%. And, and the other individual would say, well, how did you see him? Right. I can't even get my guy on the phone. Right. And they're like, oh, he just pushed the button, sent me an email, and boom, there he was on my TV. And so that really gives you a really solid foundation operationally for people to say, this individual's practice runs very well. It's a machine, and they're thinking about things like this, and they have the capacity to handle curveballs regardless of what they are.
Yeah. You know what? That's really been the secret to success of a lot of the advisors that I talk to out there that have not missed a beat during this pandemic and working remotely. It's just adaptability, like always, right? Instead of resisting stuff because I got thrown a curveball, you adapt to it. You learn how to hit that curveball and hit it really well, right? And it's, it can be fun, clearly. I mean, you guys have both, and I know this from previous discussions with you both, you've both experienced efficiencies in your business that you didn't have before that you'll carry forward, right? Because it's just to a significant degree, there are many things that are just better done remote from an efficiency standpoint, right? So let me ask you, this is kind of a question that popped into mind because you mentioned Zoom, and we're recording this on WebEx. I know both of you are using WebEx now, it seems, but maybe you've used, so I've used Zoom, I've used Microsoft Teams, I've used WebEx. Do you guys have any opinions on, what's better, what's, for advisors to use, and what, if you have a choice?
Yeah, so I think Ross and I both kind of agree on this. I've primarily used WebEx, but I'm also quite adaptable. It seems like a lot of this technology is starting to kind of converge to follow each other in terms of ease of use. So if I have a client who prefers to use Skype or Zoom, I'll figure it out on my end. It's more about what makes the client more comfortable.
Yeah. Do you send meeting invitations in advance, or you just tell them to put, time and date on the calendar, and then you send them a link to the meeting room once it's time?
Usually we want to send them a meeting link because, in lieu of a formal meeting, you still want it to have the outward appearance and the professionalism that you're scheduling something, which would then prompt the client to then go gather the materials since you've let them know what we're going to discuss, and vice versa, that you'll have time to prep. And in my opinion, the best way to operate is to, treat it like it's an actual meeting. I do periodically have clients that there's an issue that must be dealt with, and we create an ad hoc session, and I immediately invite the client, and they click into it, and then we go. But as a best practice, in my opinion, I would say it's better to formally schedule it and give yourself some runway. And then that way the client has it in their inbox, and if they have any questions, sometimes we'll even tell them, if they feel like they're technologically challenged, we'll say, look, we can start a meeting right now. It takes like 2 seconds, and you can see if it's compatible with your computer. And then they pop the thing open and they go, oh, well, I thought it was going to be much harder. And literally it's a giant green box on email. It's just click here to join meeting, and then it's autopilot. But I still think the ability to schedule it creates that outward appearance of a formal meeting, which, again, everything that we do is about setting and meeting expectations. Really sets the expectation for the client about, okay, we're really here to do business. And to Robert's point, it does create a great amount of efficiency, because things that the client would come in for in person, they would expect to take an hour, hour and a half. They know that it's in the video conference format, and you may send a 30-minute invite, and they know that you mean business, and we're going to work through these items in a rather quick fashion. But it still feels like a formal meeting.
We're going to take a quick break here, and as a show of appreciation for making this video possible, we'd like you to give 1 minute of your attention to Stu Burgoyne of Eagle Life.
Hi, this is Stuart Burgoyne, Vice President and Head of Sales at Eagle Life Insurance Company, and I want to thank you for joining our videocast. At Eagle Life, we specialize in retirement income options while serving the financial institution marketplace and their clients. Our line of fixed and fixed index annuities offer a safe money alternative with simple design, consistent renewal rates, and competitive index-linked crediting strategies. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of American Equity Investment Life Insurance Company, and we bring more than 25 years of annuity industry experience to the table. Our people-first philosophy is the cornerstone of our business approach, and we are excited to work with partners to develop income strategies that drive business. We are excited to take part in this video and share insights that may benefit your practice. Thank you again.
So when you think about, video camera angles, lighting, audio options, backgrounds, dress code, right, for virtual meetings, internet connection factors, which I assume some clients have. What are your thoughts on best practices with all that stuff that's inherent in doing a virtual meeting? Robert, you want to go first with this one?
So if I'm meeting with someone new, I still go by the old approach. The better you dress, the more faith they're going to have in you. So if there's a chance that you're going to be on a video, dress appropriately by all means.
Sorry.
You're okay. So, but in our role, so if I'm meeting someone new, I'll at least put a shirt and tie on. in terms of things like lighting and background, I definitely have an issue with lighting because I work in the dark a lot. It's so if it's noon in Colorado, it's only 6 a.m. here. So if anything, if I have an appointment in the morning in Colorado, yeah, it's dark still. In terms of the backgrounds, I think a lot of advisors get really nervous about, their family or interruptions and things like that coming in. When your kid walks into the room, changes the entire mood of the conversation. So I let my wife know that I'm going to be on calls. So that way, she has clothes on when she walks into the door.
That would change the nature of the meeting.
Yeah, that would change things pretty quickly. And same with my kids, it's nice to have clothes on, but if they come in their pajamas and they ask me for a bowl of cereal, I'm not worried. Yep.
Yeah. I know, Ross, you've shared a few times that I think the quote is that your 2-year-old sold more than you did when this pandemic started, just by walking into the office and your clients being endeared with the 2-year-old.
He's still doing it, by the way. He's like the hardest closer I know. It's ridiculous. But to answer your question, courtesy of WebEx trying to be Zoom, we can go in here and do this to ourselves now, depending on your bandwidth. Whether or not that's a positive thing, I'm not sure. So WebEx has come a long way, but I think at first you tried to keep this, you tried to keep up appearances and keep your meetings formal. And then eventually, after like 2 weeks of being locked in your house with kids and nobody could go anywhere, like you just gave up. And to Robert's point, let me turn the beach off here so I don't get too excited about going there. To his point, it's very humanizing. And I said that on our last podcast. People really, they think they know you and they hear about stories and you tell them about your kids, but I mean, literally you're trying to run a managed account proposal and then, your 2-year-old just comes and sits in your lap and it's like, at that point, you can't do anything about it. He's already part of the meeting. So, right. I mean, I've heard crazy stories from advisors that are, shirt and tie up and gym shorts down because you can only see what's in the box. I will happily say I never wore a suit on a WebEx. This is about as dressed up as I get. Most of the time, a collared shirt will suffice. You have to kind of know your client and know what it is you're going to talk about. But, what's interesting is just, again, about the expectations and how, we're using these millions of dollars of software to do these, visual presentations, and it's actually made our business infinitely more casual. So the amount of clients that I've done meetings with that are in sweat clothes, or they're like, hey, I just got back from a 2-mile run, what's up? And here I am in a shirt and tie, it's absolutely hilarious where they were to come for an in-person meeting, they'd be all dressed up and freshly showered. Now they're just like, hey, look, I'm about to cook, what do you want to talk about, right? I will say the lighting and the angle, there is such a thing as too close to the camera, and you definitely need lighting. I found myself about 3 weeks ago in isolation in a bedroom where I had zero lighting and a big set of windows behind me, and my clients couldn't see me. So all you had was a blur on WebEx, and one of my clients literally told me, I will do this thing when I see you in person because I feel like I'm doing business with Batman. And that literally was an actual quote. And I had to come back out of, quarantine, and then we were able to sit in a more well-lit room and handle that. So people still care to a certain extent, but to his point, I think it's definitely getting more casual for sure.
Yeah. And to follow up on that, for clients that I've worked with in the past, I don't need to put the tie on anymore, put the suit coat on. I'm more formal if I have not met them, set that first impression. And on those backgrounds, those beach backgrounds, to a client, I think their first impression is like, what are they hiding behind that? So I would avoid them. I think that your own room works great, right?
Nice.
Look at my conference room.
Nice.
Nice conference room. I find, so truth be told, well, a couple of thoughts just from my perspective, because I've been working in the financial services industry forever, right? And I work with a lot of executives that are running investment programs, and things have gotten really casual, especially since COVID, right? Most of the time that I'm on Zoom calls, I can get away with a t-shirt these days. Since I knew we were going to be recording this session, I actually put a collar on. but yeah, casual is the new norm. And from a lighting perspective, I actually do have, so there's a light in front of me here. Let's see what happens if I turn that off. So I look a little bit, I don't know, maybe different, maybe not, but I find a light in front of you tends to make a little bit of a difference depending on the type of bulb. It gives you some warmth, and you definitely don't want too much light behind you. But here's the truth be told part of it. So right above my head here is a skylight. And I discovered quickly when I first started doing Zoom calls that all that light shining down on my hair that's turning gray makes it look a lot more gray. So I had to get shade to put over the skylight so I didn't look quite as gray.
That's a pretty good idea. But above me is one of those canister lights, and it's like straight on my bald spot, and it definitely accentuates my baldness.
Nice. All right, so let me. I have some other questions that I wanted to ask you guys. But you both mentioned, using different types of meeting tools, and now you've kind of standardized on WebEx. But I'm curious if you have situations where clients are like, I can't do it via computer. I have to use my phone, or I'm going to use a tablet or whatever. Have you had challenges in that regard, or is that pretty easy to work out? Any suggestions or best practices as it relates to the device that clients are using, or if you guys have had to default to a phone or a tablet at times for any reason, anything like that?
I mean, I think that's part of kind of, setting the meeting ahead of time and setting the expectations of, hey, this software is this and it runs like this. I have had a couple of occasions where some of my, not even necessarily older clients, but clients that just don't really fool with computers, they couldn't get it to work on their iPad and they just kind of gave up. And then you just kind of have to go back to the phone. And, our business at its core was built on the phone. So it seems kind of like regression, but it always makes sense that the worst case scenario is you wind up doing something that you've usually done your entire career, which is handling things over the telephone, even though it seems like an oversimplification compared to this. But I really oddly, and to Robert's point about WebEx particularly evolving, the software is getting to the point where it's so user-friendly intentionally that they've really worked out a lot of the barriers to entry. As long as you set it up correctly and you make sure that all of the mechanics of that work fine, I mean, it really should be as easy as just plug and play. And the Cisco interface can pretty much work on a iPad or an iPhone if you have the app. Pre-existing. I don't necessarily find that a lot of people still have a desktop PC or a laptop. I mean, primarily they are using tablets. And a lot of people, again, they're not at work, so they don't have that big desktop PC at their office with all the computing power to handle something like this. But hasn't really been, I wouldn't call it a deal breaker by any stretch.
Yeah.
I think like Ross said, don't discount the phone. It's not an antiquated device like a fax machine. It's still our primary tool. So basically I communicate through three means, and the number one is phone, number two is email, and number three, and it's pretty far, is the video. I would say the majority of what I do is just through phone and email. It's when we really have to dive into something we feel like we need to visually connect with, is when the video kind of comes into play. Final bit is there's nothing that changes the mood to then struggling with technology on either end. It can create some frustration pretty quickly. So not pushing too hard on that is a pretty good idea. So if it's not working out great, client's not really using it, just be like, hey, don't worry about it. Hey, let's do this on the phone. I do find it seems like a lot of advisors right now are pushing really hard on the technology, and the client's not necessarily grasping it right away. And they're finding in those meetings that it's starting to blow up the meeting. Well, hit the bailout button as quickly as possible in that case and just revert back to a simple phone call.
I think that's very good advice. I've experienced the same on my end. It can get frustrating very quickly. You kind of lose the the cooperative mode of the meeting. So hitting that bailout button sooner rather than later is probably a really good practice. Robert, you brought up something else somewhat related. You mentioned sending emails as a follow-up. So let me ask you guys a last question, and then we'll wrap up part one of this video cast. And that last question is, And what about in prep for certain types of meetings? Do you send your clients, I don't think either you necessarily use an agenda that you send in advance, if I recall correctly, you said that, but for certain meetings, do you send clients a list of things that you'd like to review during a virtual meeting, whether it be account statements or whatever? And do you ever try to have them bring stuff up on screen, or you usually don't even go there?
So it depends on the meeting. So for first meetings, when I'm kind of interviewing a prospect, I give them a heads up that the first time we talk, I'm generally I just want to learn about their goals. If you want to get a bit of a jump start on it, gathering up statement copies, you're logging in and taking a look at what your Social Security benefits look like, and just looking at as the 4 things that we will likely need to discover: income, assets, liabilities, and expenses. And I give them kind of a heads up. It's like there's always something that pops up that you've forgotten to pull up, and that's okay. You're just like your accountant always sends you home with homework of some things to look up. Don't stress like having everything perfectly ready. This is just a conversation about your goals, so I can learn as much about you as I can. On reviews, it's a little different. So I have most of their data. I just give them a heads up. Hey, before our annual review, you have some accounts that aren't linked here. I would certainly like to see some data on those so I can update your plans. And then send me an email of just things that have popped up along this year that you'd like to discuss, or some things that have changed.
I don't necessarily send a formal agenda, like a written bullet pointed, we're going to do this, because of your inability. I mean, you can still see and emote through a video, but you're not in the same room with somebody, so it just feels different. So I would imagine, if you were sitting here going through this bullet pointed, very rigid presentation, it turns into more of an office PowerPoint rather than a discovery meeting or a recommendation and implementation. I have learned that depending on the subject matter or the item or task at hand, depending on how much data you're trying to actually push through that screen to the client, a lot of times it is better to say, in this meeting, we talked about updating your financial plan, and we talked about you had some outside assets that you're looking to combine, which is going to require us to retool the portfolio. So I want to send you, a current copy of your financial plan so you can get some questions and take some notes, and, and a copy of the proposal, a day in advance. That way they're not drinking from a fire hose and you're trying to run through 80 pages worth of a digital presentation, and the client is already tuned in and focused on, I understand that this is going to change, and then I understand that begets this proposal, and now I don't understand the 40 pages of charts and whatever. And then rather than them seeing it for the first time and trying to digest that, they've already been through it and said, I had a question, like I noticed that on my current allocation, I'm missing all of these things, and on the new thing, we filled in all of these things. You say, yes, of course, that's the point of what we're trying to do, is feed the existing money into round the portfolio or whatever. So, just because the technology allows for massive data overload doesn't necessarily mean that that's effective. So like Robert's saying, kind of a combination of doing what you can outside of the virtual environment, just kind of old school financial planning and brokering, which is phone calls and, data aggregation, and then really using the virtual environment for presentation, but not so much of the presentation that you're just trying to, basically drown the client with data. I think is kind of the perfect combo. But I tried to run these things in a very kind of rigid, formal environment at first, thinking that people kind of wanted the replication of that in the beginning, because there was chaos back in March, right? And it went the complete opposite way. So I think maybe Robert's got the model of the future, because the clients really do. They just want to have a conversation, and we may have thought that this is what they want, this office environment and this, but they're most comfortable sitting on their couch, really living in the environment that we're trying to help them retire to.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective. So you both implied, I think you both use Money Guide, if I'm not mistaken, and you both referenced to a degree using that virtually, and I think we'll want to get into that a little bit in part 2 of this video cast, and do a little bit of show and tell in part 2. But I think we've covered enough for part 1 at this point. So I want to thank you guys for the participation. It's been great, and your insights have been great, and I'm excited for part two. We're gonna cover things like, perhaps lessons learned the hard way, right? And getting clients who are new to virtual meetings comfortable in that setting, screen sharing as discussed, and remote collaborative financial planning. So Ross and Robert, thanks again. And for everybody that's watching, thank you all for watching, and please do tune in to part two. Bye for now. Part 2 of this video dives into screen sharing techniques and features Robert and Ross in show and tell mode. The focus is on discovery, portfolio reviews, collaborative planning, leveraging what-if scenarios, and virtual client meetings. We hope you will join us for this interactive discussion with our guests from different parts of the globe.
Thanks again to Eagle Life for making this video possible. They are a valuable partner in the Bank and Credit Union Investment Services channel and offer compelling retirement income solutions. And also, thanks again to Robert Cribbs and Ross Cantor for their good-natured participation and awesome generosity in sharing their best practices with all of us. As mentioned in the intro, this video is presented in 2 parts, and we hope you join us for both. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our 3 Stathis Mattel podcast series, the only podcast for the Bank and Credit Union Investment Services channel. This is Bob Mattel, and I want to thank you for joining us.